Hey, Econ 145 students. So obviously this is not how I wanted today's class to go. We have a lot to talk about and we don't have the right forum in which to do it. So what I'm going to do is talk to you all a little bit about data today and just review what I saw and expect from your final data sets, and then talk about the model theory component. And I'm going to open up a discussion thread on Canvas for us to talk about this, and hopefully that gets things going a little bit and we can get a little bit of the back and forth we would normally have. The big idea for your next deliverable is going to be incorporating an economic model that explains the mechanism. So if we get into what we're doing in your research project, whatever it is, you're describing some relationship. Where am I going? I'm going right here. Okay, you're describing some relationship, right? We have some variable, whatever your model is, that is connected to some other variable of interest, right? You have an outcome, whether it's crime rates, GDP, public transportation use. I'm trying to remember everybody's projects. Whatever your wages, whatever it is, you have an outcome variable connected to a independent variable, right? This y is dependent on this x. That's what you're saying in your model, and that's why we've built these models. What the theory section does is it says, hey, this is why these two things are connected. We have an economic theory that you've learned somewhere in your experience as an economist here at Sac State that connects this X to this Y. For some of you, it might be intuitive, and so it's kind of going to be hard to think about what the theory is. For some people, it might be very explicit. So if you're thinking about GDP growth, that might be very familiar for you, what you're thinking about, how adding money to the economy stimulates GDP growth. And so for some of you, we've talked a little bit about the theories that you can use. With some folks, we haven't talked about it very much. And so that's where you should be right now, right? You want to be thinking about what is the economic theory that explains the relationship between your variables. And really we're thinking about, your hypothesis. So your initial hypothesis says changes in this cause a change in this of some type. So increasing wages is going to increase labor supply, or increased low skill worker immigration is going to drive down wages in this sector. Whatever that hypothesis is has to be grounded in economic theory. And so that's the goal, is to think of what the economic theory is and model it and explain it. You can use multiple theories. You can incorporate different things. And what I want to push all of you to do is to try and find the most appropriate, most specific, most interesting model. And so one of the things that we talk about is, a lot of things can be explained in just supply and demand. I want to push you to do something more interesting than that, because that's kind of like the most base level understanding. So maybe you could talk about supply and demand for part of it, but then talk about some other more complex models. So I'm going to steal other people's research and talk about it as an example. But so if you're talking about public transportation ridership, you could just say, okay, well, there's a supply and demand model, right? Where there's some price and quantity associated with public transportation, and maybe there's a parallel market for buying a car, and if you increase demand for cars, you're going to decrease demand for public transportation, something like that. Basic, bare bones, totally allowable. Excuse me, totally allowable. But to make it more interesting, you could also incorporate another model of public transportation. For example, there's a model of public transportation consumption that looks at the cost of any trip as being a function of not just the trip cost, but the access cost and the disutility. And so the idea is, and I don't think I'm going to remember this model correctly. I'm going to go look it up. Give me 1 second. Found it. Okay. So there is a great model of public transportation in an old urban economics book I used to use that looks at the decision of whether or not to take public transportation as a, nope, too far, as a cost minimization problem where, here we go, okay, your trip cost is equal to the monetary cost of the trip, M, ooh, there we go, and then there's some access cost in terms of time and some access disutility, and then there's also some time cost associated with the actual trip and some disutility associated with the trip. So what we're saying here is, okay, if I want to get to school in the morning, it's going to cost me some monetary cost to drive my own car. It's going to cost me gas dollars, some portion of insurance, wear and tear on the vehicle, whatever. That's a monetary cost. The access cost and the disutility associated with it is how far do I have to walk to my car? How long do I have to wait to get to my car? How unpleasant is it? That kind of thing. Personal car has a low access cost and low access disutility. And then there's the actual trip, the travel or the vehicle time. And so it's how long it takes me to get to campus and the disutility of it. And so this is another way to model the decision of public transportation. And so if this is what you're doing, then you definitely want to talk to me about this model and include it because it's a really great way to apply it to your problem. And so there are tons of idiosyncratic models of behavior trying to link these X's to these Y's. And you should have seen some of them in your literature, and in your literature review discussed them, the ways that, you know, other researchers have connected explanatory variables to dependent variables. And that's what I want you to do is find those economic theories and those models. And then what you'll develop is this section of your paper that's going to talk about that. And so this is explicitly something that's going to be in your final research paper, and it's going to come in after your literature review and usually before your model and your data description, where it's going to say, this is the economic rationale for this model. This is why what I'm thinking is not irrational. It's not a spurious regression, right? It's not just throwing numbers into a pot and hoping something good comes out with a nice R squared. There is a reason and there is a thoughtful application of economic theory here. Does that make sense? So this is an important part of the paper. It's also one of the more challenging things because, again, super individual because everybody's got different subjects, and so all of your theories are going to be different. But it also is asking you to remember a lot of your economics training, right? Remember your 100B. I think everybody but one person is doing, maybe two people are doing macro. So if you're doing micro, it's going to be your 100B stuff. It's going to be utility maximization, budget constraints, firm costs, those kinds of things. And then expand on it into these sort of more individualized models. And so the other thing I want to push you all to do is reach out to me and let me know where you are with your theory. If you don't have a sense of what your theory is at all, that's totally fine. Let me know that. But I've got more experience in economics than you, and so I might have a sense of some places where we might be able to find a cool, interesting, valid, exciting theory to help explain what you're working on in your research, to help tie your variables together. You can also reach out to other faculty members if you want to email another faculty member who might have done research in your area or taught you the class that gave you the idea for your subject. Then you can ask them, like, can you just give me a sense of another model that I might use that might be relevant for my paper, or point me in the direction of that. And then the third resource besides me, or I guess, so your resources are your economics training so far, me asking me what examples I might be able to give you, your literature and what you've seen in the literature, and then other faculty that you can ask. And so those are sort of the resources you can mine for this theory section. Does that make sense? There's not one answer. There are lots of different theories that explain lots of different relationships. And again, like I said, I want to push you to have the most fully realized, thoughtful, interesting theory section possible, because that's going to give you a greater quality paper and give you more points at the end of the day. Okay? So that's the big part for theory. That's the big assignment for next time. The other thing I want to do is talk a little bit about data. Everybody got individual feedback on their data submissions. There were a couple of things that I saw that I want to make sure y'all understand. So let me open up an Excel file and show you what I'm talking about. Okay, so here I've pulled up some random data sets that I have. And a lot of people pulled data from a lot of different sources. That's totally fine. Some people got their data from one source. The main thing you want to do is you want to get to the clean data set. And we went over this in class a couple of times. But just as a review, a clean data set is going to look like this. So this is a data set that's got rental prices for apartments, distance from campus, number of bedrooms, number of bathrooms, whether they have parking or not, that's a dummy variable, whether they have a pool, whether they have a study lounge, and then distance from shopping. That's a clean data set. I've got a lot of observations. Not really. I'd rather have, like I said, really, I'm going to push you all to have triple digits, right? 100 observations, give or take. More is better, always. There's never a time when more isn't better unless you crash Stata. If you get there, kudos. That did happen once. But really, you want to have more data. The more data you have, the more you're going to give the statistical software to analyze, and the better they're going to do at finding a relationship between your variables. So not to totally review Econ 140, but remember what we're doing here is we are connecting the relationship between your X variables and your Y variables. And you're giving the statistical software some sample to try and draw a line of best fit through. If you only give them 10, 20, 30, 40 observations, the software is not going to be able to connect the relationship between X and Y very well. If you give them 100 observations, that's going to be a lot easier. So that's why I keep hammering everybody on more observations. You also want to try and have a good number of explanatory variables. This is also kind of a small number of explanatory variables. If I'm trying to say that being close to Sac State raises rents, I've got this variable of interest and then these other control variables that are other determinants. But if I put this in Stata and some of them come out as insignificant, I'm going to lose some explanatory power. My model might not all be statistically significant, so I might lose stuff. So that's why I also am pushing y'all to have as many explanatory variables as possible. And then in terms of having a clean data set, what I mean is you just have your data labels and your observations. You don't want to have any missing observations. If you do, talk to me and we'll figure out how we can solve it. And you don't want a bunch of formatting, colors, spaces, any of that, because that's all going to get shot down by the statistical software, okay? Because it's not about making it look pretty. It's about making a clean, easy to read set of data for the software to read. So what most people are going to should have done was take, so what do we have here? I have CPI for data for June and July in 2019. And so I could go in and organize that by month and year and clean it to make it work for me. And so I probably want to say, okay, well, I want, that's going to be a time series data. I want to go by year, and so, or maybe by month. And I'm going to say, okay, so I want to go from January 1990 up to whenever I'm done, and I can just drag that down. There we go. I'll go through some period of time and then fill in my observation for CPI for that month, and then add in my other explanatory variables, home price index maybe, or what was my example in class, whether my team what my team's winning percentage was, what the unemployment rate was, things like that. And so it's not saying that I can't use this data, but I want to organize it in such a way that it's going to be useful for me. And so you want to organize it in sort of a, this is my Y, this is X1, this is X2, this is X3, this is X4, and so on. And then you might have, if it's time series data, organized by month, or if it's panel data, organized by month and city, and then it'll have like San Francisco, San Francisco, San Francisco, blah, 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 right? So that's what you really want to get at with your clean data set. I'm not saying you should ever get rid of any of your data. You want to save all the original data sources, but you want to have that clean data set there. And then you can go in and do stuff with it. So hopefully that makes sense. Hopefully that was a review and somewhat boring for y'all. Again, if you have questions about this stuff, you have to reach out and contact me. I know I'm not available in person right now. I'm hoping to get a negative COVID test soon, but I am available over Zoom. We can meet on Zoom. I did 145 completely over Zoom during the pandemic, so I can answer your questions that way too. So that's where we are. So if you go to your syllabus, which hopefully you keep handy, I do, because it's got the full outline of the semester. We are in week 8, so we're going to be building the economic theory and model discussion. And that's what, I've been talking about so far. And it's not, our first introduction to it. So hopefully you've been thinking about this as we go through, what you might want to do. Next week, we'll start doing regression results, and I'll post an announcement to this effect on Canvas, but barring COVID issues, we need to, I think, go back to twice a week while we get the regression results together, because I think it'll be useful for everybody to be in person in the computer lab, talking about our regression results, going over some of the basics from Stata. I'll put together some materials to help y'all with that. Most of the materials that I already have up are live on Canvas or on YouTube, so you can always check those out anytime. But I'll put together some new stuff for the specifics of what we'll be doing. And that's why, I want you to have your data sets done before we get to that part, because you don't want to be cleaning data or searching for data when you're working on your regression results and writing them up and interpreting them. And then we'll be working on regression results for week 9 and week 10. Week 11 is conclusion and abstract, and that's when you'll be basically done, right? You'll have written this paper where we've got a nice thick lit review that explains the extant literature. You've got your data discussion that explains where you got your data from. You've got your theory section that explains how your data is going to be connected to your model and what the underlying factors are, right? What the underlying coherent ideology that connects your variables is. You'll have your model discussion, anything that you need to say about your model and explain it, explain the variables. then you'll have your results and you'll have a discussion of those results. And that's part of what we'll go through in those 2 weeks that we work on our regression results, is interpreting them, discussing the shortcomings of the models and what you would do next time. And then we'll write the conclusion and the abstract, the sort of beginning and the end of the paper, in week 11. And then for week 12, it's going to be a draft. It's going to be time to have a draft paper. And so that'll be when you tie up any loose ends. I'll hammer y'all on grammar stuff. And hopefully you'll have made edits to the stuff that I've given you edits on so far. So that's where we are in stuff. Let me know what questions you have. Please, please, please reach out to me and let me know if you'd like to have a Zoom to talk about your progress. And I'll see you all next time. I'll let you all know as soon as I get results on how the next couple of class meetings will go. Okay, that's it. Let me know what questions you have. Thank you.